Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals on what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earle. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsintensive.com. Today's episode, I have a conversation with my dad, Marcus Earle, and we talk about transitions. The relevance of transitions for this episode is that I am actually transitioning out of being the host of The Mind of a Therapist and passing on the torch to my dad and the team at Psychological Counseling Services. Towards the end of the interview, I talk a bit about my reasons for making this shift and how I'm super excited for the future of The Mind of a Therapist. I think my dad and his team are going to be great, and I think that it's going to be a really cool extension of the work that Psychological Counseling Services is doing. And I wanted to say thanks for listening to the podcast. It means a lot that you would listen to me and my guests speak, and I hope that some of these episodes have been helpful for you and supportive to you on your healing journey, and know that I'm wishing you the best as you move through life. So without further ado, here's my conversation with my dad. All right, well, welcome to the podcast today, Dad. This is a pivotal episode in the podcast as I have decided to transition in different directions away from hosting this podcast, and you and the PCS team are going to take over that role, and I'm excited for that. I think today we could talk a bit about transitions, and maybe part of that would be talking about grief and loss as well, because often with transitions there is a level of loss. But yeah, I'm curious, in your practice and maybe in your personal life, what do you see as some of the key difficulties for people as they're making transitions, and then we can go from there.
Well, it's the very same one I'm experiencing right now. I don't want to. Um, and if we had a live audience right now, I would be recruiting them to convince you to stay, because I'm quite certain people would want for you to stay. So um, I think transitions are difficult because they often include loss as part of them. And so, for me, right now, the idea of you not doing this any longer is a tremendous loss for me. In so many ways, and that's the other thing about transition is it's not just a simple equation, you know. And so for me, the different pieces of this are you're my son, and it's been nice to have that we could talk about from time to time. I have totally loved listening to the podcast that you're leading. Um, and the amazing ability you have to put people at ease and just to have a comfortable conversation with them. The knowledge base that you bring in, even, at a young age, the things that you read, the things that you know already, and the way you tie that into the interviews has been wonderful to listen to. Couldn't be happier and more proud with the way you've handled this and how you've done things. So so this is the other piece of it is, in the loss of you doing this, I also have the celebration that you've done this. So I have the appreciation. I have also, the opportunity that you started something that I wasn't going to start. Good idea, never get around to it. Uh, so for me, that's such a rich part of the experience. And then on the other side is knowing that, my loss and what probably is going to be our loss, for more people than just myself, is that what you're moving towards is something that I'm excited for you about. So it's this this is both and I think that's the thing about transitions. Can I hold on to, my losses? And in the losses, can I pay attention to all my learning, from where I've been? Um, and then take that and celebrate, what's ahead, no matter the fear, no matter the apprehension. Can I be excited about what's ahead of me? What's my new learning? Um, and so that's what, is going on inside of me, at this point in time. And I was just talking to a current intern and saying, what I'm excited about in regards to where we're headed is doing them myself to a degree. I'm a little less excited about that, and yet also looking forward to it. I'm hoping, and this is only a hope at this point in time, that different therapists in our PCS community would also do interviews so that we would have this expansive um, experience where the mind of a therapist is the mind of many therapists, which probably terrifies a lot of people that I just said that. Um, but for me, I get excited about um, different perspectives, different ways of talking about things. And I think if the group here can get excited about the potential, of sitting down and talking with somebody that they're interested in talking to, I think that could be a really cool experience and help both other professionals, to hear other professionals talking about these things. And I think for clients to just hear, like, what is it that goes on inside of these interesting people that are called therapists?
I think you've talked about that a number of times, maybe on the podcast, definitely off the podcast, of one of the reasons PCS is so special and effective, especially with the intensive. But I think even the clients that see therapists outside of the intensive at PCS, is just a PCS therapist is their primary therapist. I think that culture of diversity and different approaches, there's seemingly, from my experience working at PCS, some core ideas like parts and Marilyn Murray's work that kind of bring together the thinking. There's certainly a lot of therapists who practice EMDR, and at the same time, each therapist at PCS has their own orientation and focus in their psychotherapeutic work, and so this podcast being an extension of what happens inside PCS, I love that idea, because that is, I think, just a really important principle of diversity, I think, within any system and within the PCS intensive PCS organization. I think that element is why so many people are really helped who are intensive clients, but also non-intensive clients.
Yes, I think that's true. I hope it's true. I mean, that's what I'd want to be true.
Yeah.
Um, because we're so multifaceted, you know. Was also having a political discussion with this intern and just looking at, how we get into a right and wrong mindset. My perspective's right, your perspective's wrong. You lack compassion. I'm the one that holds the key to compassion, as opposed to, what I think is the reality for almost everything, both right, both wrong. And so how do we have conversations feeling right about something, and allowing the other person to be right, so then I can face my wrongness, you know. And so that complexity, I think, is quite wonderful. Is that we can hold space for conversations that are certainly difficult and yet enriched by the difficulty. Because then I have to dig deeper inside myself. Oh, wow, boy, you feel so right in what you're saying to me right now, and it feels so wrong to me. And yet you believe it so strongly and so passionately that how can I just make you wrong? You know, I'd have to say there's something wrong with you, which is what I think we do. We make the other person a bad person, a wrong person, less than, as opposed to saying, well, they're another human being just like I am. interesting. They're so passionate about something so different that feels so wrong to me. Maybe, maybe I should work to understand that, you know, because if I work to understand that, then I might open up doors, might open up my eyes to things that I hadn't paid attention to before. And there's growth, for me in that. Why wouldn't I want to grow? You know, well, I actually can think of a reason I don't want to grow because it's scary, terrifying. I had to leave what's comfortable. Um, but if we put those things aside, we get to a better place. Um, so obviously in this transition, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you your thoughts about change since
Oh,
you started.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about as you were talking there. I've done some reflecting on like what are the big takeaways that I've had out of all these conversations. A number of leading psychotherapists and like people who are just in the trenches. Like their work is being in relationship with people in a way that's helpful to others, right? And like that's the work we're about. And I think I view change as, you know, starting in our relationship with ourself and in being with ourself. Like being with our experience in a certain orientation of what in internal family systems we call self energy. So from that place of compassion and care, when like the parts of ourselves that are blended and reactive and running the show feel safe to kind of give us some space. And even if we have just a little bit of that, it's maybe 1%, 5%, 10% of care, compassion, love for ourselves. I think out of that, we can really change how we interact because, like you were talking about earlier, this polarization that we often have internally then is replicated outside. And that's just, so
Right.
pervasive in our society. And I think the real thing that that can shift that is what you were talking about of curiosity. And I think that starts with curiosity about our experience and compassion, but then we can show that more outward. And I think we can practice showing that outward too, and then that can help us. So I think either way, ourselves or outwards. And I think part of that is with people, but then I also think part of that is with the natural world is when we can just be in, the forest or be in the suburbs, and just be curious and notice what's going on around us. I think that's a huge starting point for change and healing, which we need a lot of in our society. So I think
Yeah.
that would be my answer.
So that's pretty awesome. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that um, that change is unlikely to happen, if I can't look inside myself and I can't notice, you know, what am I frustrated about? What's difficult? What am I excited about? Um, and instead of just saying, well, that just frustrates me, you know, which is the easier path, one that's well worn inside of me, um, to say, well, how come I'm frustrated? So what is happening inside? So what part of me is frustrated? And to be curious about, okay, well, how come that's frustrating? So yeah, and then I can begin to open up, what's going on inside of me. And as I open that up, then I'm more likely to have a different perspective or a shift in perspective. Am I hearing you right?
Totally. And I think part of that can be done just by ourselves, meditating perhaps. But I think oftentimes, especially with my experience, it happens in relationship with someone, so someone who can just sit with me and, have that compassion and curiosity. It's contagious, and that's the nice thing I think about like this key, this, I don't know, these parts, this concept I'm talking about is it's not just something that you can do internally, but like you can provide that for others, whether you're a therapist, whether you're someone interested in therapy, like that space of like what Carl Rogers talks about of like unconditional positive regard, just really trying to practice listening, understanding the person across from you, or then yourself. And then, when someone else can hold that space for you, it can catalyze more of that self energy that you can show yourself, and then that you can show the world. And so I think that's the that's the one like hopeful thing for me that I've been thinking about and learned from a lot of these conversations, is just like every small interaction we have on a daily basis matters, right? And sometimes we can beat ourselves up when we get in ruts and aren't living how we want to live, but it's just, there's always that opportunity to bring more of that compassion and care in each moment. And that's also making me think of the work of Viktor Frankl and Edith Eger, both Holocaust survivors, who have written on the ability to choose in a given moment. That's like the last of human freedoms. Viktor Frankl writes, it's like to choose our attitude and disposition in a given circumstance. So
our listeners should know that when I'm doing interviews, those references will not come up because my brain doesn't work as well as yours. So that will be another loss in this transition. Is that, and I just think about being open and listening to other people, and we each have our own reactivity in so many different ways. I also noticed that I was just listening to you, I got distracted for a moment, and where I went was this strong sense of feeling love for you, and your depth, the way you contemplate, your compassion for people. And I started going off in my mind. I go, come back, Marcus. And that's one of the ways at times that, I don't listen fully, and it's not only about, just really appreciating the other person. And I don't get to say, probably won't have another interview where I say, I love somebody. But with you, I get to do that. It's a distraction at times. Just, it can be so many things. It can even be about appreciating somebody, and then that appreciation sometimes feeling intimidated, and then intimidation then going into all the self-doubt. There's so many ways that we distract away from connection, and how preferred it is to own the distraction. Hey, I just went there. And this time, is quite lovely thing to get to share with you for me. And it might horrify you that I just did that, but it's this opportunity just to simply share honestly about what's happening, and to worry less about the judgment. You can't not worry about being judged. That's not possible. How do I worry less about being judged? And so that I can step into, what may feel like a bold statement or risky statement.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the things when I did the IFS level 1 training, that was an idea I was really drawn to, is how just owning when you are taken out of the conversation by a part of your own, and in the therapeutic context, you can share what you want to share about that part of you, what you think is appropriate, what you think would be helpful to that other person, what your system's comfortable with. But just acknowledging that, because especially people who have experienced trauma, they're often so in tune with the people around them. And so it's so honoring of the other person for you to just acknowledge. We all do it. Just acknowledging that humanness, that part that got reactive in a given situation, and how helpful that is in building connection.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So you were talking about, this idea of having the PCS team, definitely being a part of the podcast. going forward? Are there other visions that you have for like topics that you want to make sure to cover, conversations you'd really like to have, that sort of thing?
Yeah, my starting point for me, which I've already let everybody know, is I want to interview everybody here. I selfishly would like to get to know them better. So it's an opportunity for me to do two things at once, which is, is a characteristic of mine, as you know. Um, to where doing the podcast, we do that. Also get to have a conversation and get to know the therapist, and just better understand, what brought you into this field, um, what what you enjoy, those types of things. Having a conversation. So, because I do think that us being known is helpful. I think it helps people making a choice in the therapist that they're going to see. Um, it's helpful to know, yep, another human being. Um, so there's comfort in that, I think. And I think if a client wants to come to PCS because they need, the amazing therapist, who's got it all put together, then they're probably gonna need to choose someplace else. Um, you know,
They may never find that.
I never find that. But to be in with somebody who's walking through life as you're walking through life, but who is able and has been trained, is working to take care of themselves so that they can step back, and look at a broader picture, and help you to look at a broader picture and to walk more deeply into what you need to walk into. I'd want people to know that that's the group that we have here. And so I think conversation about each of us, as a person, that I am most excited about. I'm also excited about calling up friends and having conversations with them, other professional friends, and just catching up, about what's going on, what they're excited about, and what's driving them in the moment. Because I think we all get driven, about certain things at a certain time in our career. Um, and so I just think for me, it's going to be an opportunity to catch up with people. Um, I think it'll be a great opportunity for people that listen to get caught up, with people. Because I think when we catch up with people, we learn. It's important to catch up with the people in our lives um, and around us. I wish there was so much more time to just hang out and catch up, and that's one of the things that I've been working to better do here, as the person who's kind of leading this thing, which is an interesting dynamic. We could talk longer, don't have time. Um, but is taking the time to work to catch up with, the people that work here, because it's I need I I need the connection for me personally. Um, I believe we do better connected. Um, and we feel connected by being known, so that's that's a broad sense about where I'm hoping we go. So topics I wouldn't not identify, right offhand. I think it's going to come. The topic's going to develop with the person I'm talking with.
And I think I mean, that's kind of the way I've oriented these conversations, and it's just, I think, more enjoyable. We're not going to have this point, all these points we talk about, we're going to like just, the interviewer is going to bring curiosity, and we'll maybe have a direction that we're headed in the conversation. But really, I think when the conversations unfold naturally too, we uh, maybe create a space where we can explore areas that we put new ideas together, and I think too, like for me as someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, I connect most when it is a natural conversation, and when people, I love what you're talking there about just like connecting, catching up, talking about people's experience, how they're doing and what drives them, because that's what I get most out of when I'm listening to podcasts, just those honest conversations, and the guests, or the podcast hosts that hold space for the guests to just be open and honest and vulnerable, and like connecting to their humanness, is, I think, a really nice thing. So that's cool. I'll be excited to listen to the interviews myself.
Yeah. I'm gonna be graded by you now. Uh, the the thing that excuse me. The I don't was there another question that you had?
mm, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, because um so I wanted to ask you, your ending question, what's your message of hope? Because um it's such a lovely question that you have, and I was just curious, very curious, but listeners are curious, what's your message of hope?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what I was talking about earlier. It's just like, life is so hard. There's so many difficulties for us in all of these areas in our lives, and most of them center around relationships, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, and relationship with the food we eat, the natural systems we live. Like, there's so many in our society. There's so many things that disconnect us from all those things I mentioned. And I think the message of hope is like, amidst that disconnection, I really think that I mean, there's always those experiences where we do connect with
Right.
others, with the natural world, with ourselves, and those moments are powerful, especially when we really feel safe with someone. And I know you've talked about that with me, of like, that is those are spiritual experiences, when someone really,
Yeah.
like, trusts you and fully opens up, this like really tender part of them, this really tender emotion, or vice versa, when you do that with someone. It's like those moments of deep emotional connection, of honest, like, I think that's where the hope is like, amidst all the problems in our larger society that I know are easy for me to focus on at times and just try to figure out solutions and whatever. Like, those moments of connection I have when I'm out in the wilderness, that I have with my wife, with my family, with my friends, and with myself too. Like, another theme in the interviews has been like mindfulness. Just being in the moment when you're washing the dishes or sweeping the floor, doing household chores or at work. Like, those simple moments where we're just doing something. It's just a human experience, and I think that is nice. And yeah, so I guess that there is connection. And as we go through our subjective journeys, given the subjective pain that we experienced when we were younger, there's so many opportunities to heal as we connect with ourselves and others.
Yes. Yeah, and you do a marvelous job with those things. The ability to pause and pay attention, because if we do pause and we pay attention, often the first stop is the difficulty. If you continue to pause, next stops are, there's some nice things going on right now. Taking a long hike, my feet really hurt, but if I pause, oh, you know, it feels good to be out here.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, I just stopped walking, and it's nice to be quiet and still and listen to everything around me. So, yeah, you've been such a wonderful role model about the ability to pause,
Yeah.
you know, and to continue to look for the hope, in everything around us. Uh, so thank you.
Yeah. I was just
Thank
thinking too, like, I love the things that kind of like force you to pause or be present in a way. Like, both of us have been kind of getting into deliberate cold exposure. So get into really cold rivers or ice baths, showers. And, when it's hard for your mind to wander when you're in like 40-degree water.
Nope, it's only focused on survival. I
Focus
first,
on getting out, maybe.
yeah, I first thought you said cult, and I go, what cult experiences are we? Then I realized you were saying cold
Yeah.
experiences. Yeah, that's been kind of fun. So another lead of yours that has me adventuring into new things that super helpful.
That's
Um,
good. Cool. Well, I think that's is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
so many things.
Yeah.
There's so much that we didn't get to, which is okay. Because I know there's so much more that you've learned over this process, of doing this with other people. And that's the hallmark of you, which is learning with curiosity and compassion. And I simply want to say I'm grateful for you taking a lead on this. That is so meaningful to me that you just said, "What about doing this, Dad?" I go, "Great." Um, so I am grateful for this time that you've chosen to do this. And I guess the last thing is if you would like to share with people what you're going towards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I was gonna just record myself separately and do that, but if you have the time, I could just share
I
now.
do.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, one big reason I'm making a shift is because I have decided to make a shift career-wise for the time being away from being a psychotherapist, and that's not to say that I'm not interested in psychotherapy at all anymore, or that I won't, venture back into the field at some point, but for me, there's a few reasons that I made that shift. And so with that shift, I'm still interested in being a podcast host, and my wife and I are actually going to be starting a podcast that'll probably start publishing in 5 months or so. But we're both, I was finding I really like talking to therapists, but I want to talk to other folks as well. So I'm really interested on like what are principles maybe that are cross-disciplinary, but just principles in various fields that like allow systems to regenerate or heal. So I have like huge interest in food and agriculture, and so looking at those systems, like what directions do we need to move to heal our lands and produce healthy food in a way that supports systems. What about the human body, right? Like what are the foods? What are certain lifestyle interventions and practices that help the body regenerate and heal from chronic diseases and prevent chronic diseases in the first place. And definitely continue to talk with therapists too, like what are elements, principles for healing in relational systems, in our own internal systems, societal systems, perhaps even economic systems. Like I like the idea of really expanding the disciplines of who we interview, and yeah, so that's the direction I'm headed. It seemed a little overwhelming to do this and that given my current schedule, so that's where I'm headed.
Fantastic. And once you start that podcast up, the two of you, then I'll let people know. Hey, by the way, if you want to hear his voice again, uh, this is what he's doing right now. Um, so thank you.
Yeah, and I'm super excited, like I said, for you guys to be starting your podcast because I mean, there's so many people whose lives are transformed going through the intensive, and for people to be able to, one, like you were saying, listen and get to know the team before they go, because it is a big commitment, but then also after they go, to like stay connected to those therapists who held that space for them to heal. Like that's I think a really wonderful service that this podcast can be, and then for the podcast to continue to reach a greater audience of people, and inspire them to continue to connect. I mean, I think that as you all continue to keep this alive, it will definitely do that. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Cool. All right. Well, great talking with you today, Dad, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye-bye.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.